So JCWI, the Joint Council for the Welfare of Immigrants, we are a charity that for well over 50 years now, we've been working for the rights of migrants in the UK. And what is relatively unusual about us is that we really work on all aspects of immigration. So we help refugees who are seeking protection in the UK, but we also help all different kinds of migrants. We have a couple of projects specifically focused on people who are coming as family migrants. We also have campaigns around European migrants and the end of EU freedom of movement. Well, what we realized is that in the UK, we really don't have a conversation about undocumented migrants who have made their lives here. And we talk a lot in the press and the media about asylum seekers, and in particular, over the last year, people arriving on small boats crossing the channel. We have probably estimates say 800,000 to up to 1.2 million people living undocumented in the country. Now, the vast majority of them did not come on a little boat or on the back of a lorry. The vast majority of them came legally to the UK, and our system pushes them out of that legal status. So that's what we want to fix. We want a system that allows people to build a life here and to set up their lives on a secure and permanent status much quicker. Well, so most people will basically not be able to renew their visa. So that most people are granted a visa either for 6 months or for 30 months when they first come to the UK. And then at the end of that, then you have to make another application and apply to stay in your home and to stay in your job and to stay with your family. And that application is very complicated. And it's very expensive, and it costs several £1,000s per person every time you have to do that. So what we found was people who are experiencing some kind of crisis in their lives, whether that be a mental health breakdown or the breakdown of a relationship, or any other kind of crisis, perhaps they lose their job. Anyway, if they don't have the money available, or they simply are in the midst of a health crisis, that's when people lose their status. So if you happen to have a mental health breakdown at the same time around when you would have to renew your status, that might mean that it's just simply impossible for you to do it. Or if you're caring for a family member who's severely ill, you may not have the funds, or you just simply may not prioritize renewing your visa. So what my research found is that people are at severe risk of exploitation and abuse once they become undocumented. The men that we spoke to were twice as likely to experience domestic violence as the average in the country, and the women that we spoke to were 3 times as likely to experience domestic violence. We also found a high proportion of people being forced to work long hours without any health, safety, protections, no time off, and then even then being underpaid, or sometimes just not being paid at all. And the reason why this happens is because these people are denied the protection of the state. So these people can't go to the police. Undocumented migrant women can't go to a refuge if they're being abused by their partner. If they go to the police, they're as likely to be arrested as their partner is. And then also, so in the workplace, if you're undocumented, it's a criminal offense to work at all. Obviously, people need to work because people need money. If you're undocumented, there's no way of relying on welfare or benefits. That's completely out of the question for you. So you have to work, but you can't report your employer if they underpay you. There's nowhere where you can go. You can't go to the police, you can't go to the labour authorities, you can't take them to court. And then in extreme cases, of course, that leads to trafficking as well, and people being held in modern slavery. One of the features of our immigration system for people who have visas, for people who come here legally, is that it takes a really long time to have a permanent stable status. And you have to usually renew your visa every 30 months. And basically most migrants are on either a 5-year route to a permanent status or a 10-year route to a permanent status. And a lot of the migrants that I spoke to in my research who became undocumented were on this 10-year route, because 10 years having to renew over and over again. And again, it costs thousands of pounds every time you renew. So over 10 years, in order to get to a state where you can apply for indefinite leave to remain in the country, an individual will spend over £12,000 simply on visa fees. And that's not counting legal fees. And as I say, the system is extremely complicated. Most people at some point will need to use a lawyer. As I said, people lose their status at a crisis point. If they have to wait 10 years before they have a stable status, then at any point within a decade, if they experience a crisis, that can mean they lose their status. So you're giving them a lot of opportunities for this to not work. Just to extend a visa is 10 times more expensive on average than other European countries. And to get indefinite leave to remain in a permanent status, we're talking about 20 times as expensive here. And let's not forget, again, that's on that 10-year route. Most other European countries allow you to get a permanent residence after 5 years. So not only is it more expensive, but you're paying it more times because you have to pay it 4 times over the course of that 10-year route. So actually, it's vastly much more expensive. Well, this is a really important moment, actually, because we're potentially looking at a serious explosion in the number of undocumented people living in the UK, because the government doesn't know how many European citizens live in this country. Nobody knows exactly. We estimated it at 3 million during the referendum, but we know that about 5 million people have already applied for settled status. So we were way off, way off. And we don't actually know how many people there are. But what we do know is that no scheme of this kind ever reaches 100% of its target. And if you think about, if there are 5 million Europeans living here and 1% don't apply, and that deadline goes by and they become undocumented, that's 50,000 new people who have lost their status overnight. I mean, that's a huge increase. And that's only if it's 1%, if the government managed to reach 99% of people to apply for settled status, which is quite unlikely. So the first thing is that faster route to regularization. We believe that anybody who's lived in the UK for 5 years or more undocumented should just be able to get back on track. After 5 years is a reasonable number as compared to other countries that have regularization programs. 20 years is far too long. And if we put in 5 years, then in my research, 82% of the people that we spoke to would be eligible for that. We could vastly decrease the undocumented population, which would be beneficial for everybody. We also want an end to the 10-year route that most visa holders are on. We want to cut that down to 5 years, and we want to make it much cheaper. If somebody's already applied for a visa, got given the visa, and come to start building their life in the UK, it doesn't make sense to put them through a whole nother huge test and application process every few months. Even people who are born in the UK can be considered undocumented migrants, which is absurd. And most people don't know that. People assume if you're born in the UK, then you're a British citizen, but that's not the case. And we think that if you're born in the UK, you should never face the prospect of being called a migrant who doesn't have a right to be here and being sent away. So we think people should have automatic British citizenship if they're born here. So I have the story of Akna, who was a client of JCWI's. He came to the UK to study accounting. He came from Nigeria and he came on a visa to study, and he brought his family, his wife and his children. And then he lived here and he studied and he worked as well alongside his studies to support his family. And when he was almost completed his course, he suffered a mental breakdown. and he requested time off from his studies, which meant that he had to obviously, he wasn't fulfilling the terms of his student visa, so he had to request an extension of his visa. And that extension was denied, and that was the sort of last sort of straw for him. And he attempted suicide, and he had a severe mental health episode, and his whole family suffered a huge amount. And he became undocumented, and he had to work sort of £3 an hour if he was lucky, if the boss would pay him, while struggling with his mental health, trying desperately to stay out of sight of the authorities, while his children and his family, grew up here and belonged here, and he was trying to provide for them, but it was incredibly difficult. And eventually, after nearly 10 years of being undocumented, he came to JCWI, and based on his extreme vulnerability and his mental health situation, we were able to help him get his status back. And eventually we also managed to help them get nationality, so they're now all British citizens. And Akuna has been able to get the mental health support that he so desperately needed. His wife is actually training to become a mental health nurse now. And Akuna has gone back to his studies, and he's studying for a law degree, because he was inspired by the lawyers at JCWI who were able to help him. And I think that that's the thing really to focus on, is that, we talk about all the terrible things that happen to people because of the cruelty of our immigration system, but we also need to talk about what we're trying to win. And Akuna and his family are able to thrive now. We're looking to give people back the possibility of living up to their potential and living up to their dreams. All the people that I spoke to wanted to work, in jobs that help people because they've had such bad experiences themselves. The people who have been regularized in my research, they were working as carers, they were working as social help volunteers to assist people with disabilities. They were working, in medicine. They are all people who have dreams and have ambitions and careers, and they want to be part of society and they want to give back. And what we're working towards is just a situation where people aren't held back by the immigration system, and where they can just thrive in our communities.